this is what common sense told us would happen when we'd get to a point where it didn't really matter if you were vaccinated or not. And that's where we are. And now how do you undo all the damage that's been done? I don't think you can. The CDC is now rolling back and loosening some of its guidance as it pertains to COVID-19, signaling really a shift in how the CDC looks at this, from a pandemic to something that Americans are just going to live with. I mean, most of us have known that COVID is just something that we're going to have to live with for the better part of 2 years. It seemed like it was going to be impossible to eradicate it. And so I just think it's interesting that the CDC is now coming wise to this. But there's a couple things in its new loosened CDC guidance that I find very interesting, and that seems like things that many of us were talking about months ago, if not a year ago. And that is the idea of letting functioning adults make decisions for themselves, as opposed to, for instance, in states like Washington, putting mandates down that people might not even follow anyway. So a couple things in the CDC guidance I want to touch on. First, this all of a sudden acknowledgement that you have the vast majority of the population that has some sort of protection against COVID, not just because of vaccines, but because they've had COVID before. This from the CDC guidance. CDC's COVID-19 prevention recommendations no longer differentiate based on a person's vaccination status, because breakthrough infections occur, though they are generally mild, and persons who have had COVID-19 but are not vaccinated have some degree of protection against severe illness from their previous infection. How long have anti-vaccine mandate people been saying that? Seriously, how long have they been saying that? That they were previously infected and so they didn't feel a need to get the vaccine. And now the CDC is like, oh yeah, we have a massive coverage in our country from protection against COVID because of people who've had it and people who've been vaccinated. Yeah, that's what people have been saying for like a year. And so now the CDC is saying, its recommendations, they don't differentiate between someone who has a vaccine and someone who has a previous infection. Interesting. Another thing from the CDC guidance, overall booster dose coverage in the United States remains low. So a pretty low number of Americans have received COVID boosters, which is concerning given the meaningful reductions in risk for severe illness and death that the booster doses provide, which I have said all along I do think that there is data on, that being fully vaccinated can prevent you as an individual from serious illness or death. I've never disputed that. What I've always been in dispute of is how much, first of all, the efficacy of the vaccines in preventing transmission is obviously low, and whether mandates for vaccines actually make good on the intent of them, which is to stop the spread. So this goes on to say, not only do boosters reduce risk for severe illness and death, but they counter the waning of vaccine-induced immunity. And this is what we talked about Monday on the show. So Governor Jay Inslee has decided to do away with something he announced at the beginning of July, which is that state workers under his purview will be mandated to get the COVID booster and to stay up to date on it to continue employment. Well, the governor has rolled that back and they're now going to make it optional. They're going to incentivize it. But that led me to question on Monday, well, why would you keep the original vaccine mandate in place? Because the governor's saying, oh, boosters aren't mandated, but the original vaccine is. Okay, so you have state workers who were vaccinated last summer. Well, based on science and data, which the governor likes, if that's all they did, then they're probably not really protected anymore. We know that the vaccine efficacy starts to wane after about 6 months. So you're not going to hire someone who didn't get the vaccine a year ago, but other people who got the vaccine a year ago but no boosters after that can still keep their jobs, even though, as the CDC says, without the booster, the initial vaccine becomes ineffective. That makes no sense. And so there's a lot of questions about whether governors like Inslee, who have vaccine mandates in place, are going to look at this CDC guidance and follow the CDC guidance and say, okay, we're no longer going to treat people who are vaccinated or unvaccinated differently, according to the CDC. That would make sense, right? And now the governor can use the CDC as cover. I mean, the governor knows that his existing vaccine mandate doesn't make any sense. He either doesn't want to take the political hit for pulling it, or he's worried about pending lawsuits over people who were fired about the vaccine mandate. So that's the only reason at this point he's not pulling it. But he could use the CDC and say, okay, the CDC guidance has been updated, so now we're going to update our mandates to reflect that. I think that still leaves a question about, okay, what do you do with all the people you fired for not having a vaccine? And I go back to something I said repeatedly in the fall of 2021. You cannot, as a government official, make long-term decisions based on a pandemic that was rapidly changing and a pandemic that wasn't going to be around forever to that extent. So here you have the state that's firing firefighters, firing police officers during a public safety crisis, firing state troopers, firing plow drivers, leading to shutdowns of mountain passes, firing ferry workers, had all these immense impacts on our infrastructure, our transportation systems, on public safety. When this is what common sense told us would happen, when we'd get to a point where it didn't really matter if you were vaccinated or not. And that's where we are. And now how do you undo all the damage that's been done? I don't think you can. All the businesses that have been shuttered and never opened back up. And now finally the CDC, after more than 2 years of the pandemic, is saying, yeah, people need to, be able to make decisions for themselves about how to stay safe and healthy. You think? I was never of the mindset that mandates would work anyway. Especially when you had a governor where, half the state isn't going to like him politically. And so if he tells them to do something, they might be less prone to do it. It was like carrot versus a stick. I just think that a carrot is more effective in saying, hey, coming out, and there were many governors who did this. Like, hey, here's what health officials say. Here's what you need to know about this disease. Here's what we recommend that you do to protect yourself, to protect your friends, to protect your family, to protect your neighbors. And then trust in citizens to do the right thing. I think that that's really all you can do as a government. I mean, many of the mandates weren't even enforceable anyway. So the CDC now coming full circle, picking up on narratives that folks who were deemed far right or conspiracy theorists or, anti-vaccine, COVID deniers, things that they've been saying for the better part of a year. And now we're going to pretend like they weren't all vilified for the last 2 years. And now the CDC says it, and so it's all normal and we can all move on. This is what happens when people are singularly focused on politics, even in matters of public health. It results in policies and procedures that don't make any sense.